This is Kat Klingon-Smith with Retro Crime. A little bit about how this podcast started. I haven't talked about that yet. I had my daughter Kate in March of 2020. The following week, my husband was laid off from his job of 14 years. Suddenly, there was a quarantine, and people who had never experienced depression before were being diagnosed with it. I was especially vulnerable because a few years prior, I had been diagnosed with postpartum depression after my son Zach was born. Part of it was due to being stuck inside with a newborn. We counterattacked this risk by finding a safe way to get out of our home. As soon as it got dark outside, we got in our Highlander and packed up all the kids, including newborn Kate, and drove to haunted sites. When we ran out of ghosts, I looked up historic sites and then roadside attractions. Eventually, I began looking for murder sites. My husband, he finds the haunted places the most interesting, but I grew fascinated by true crime. We would go to a house and the lights would be on. There would be a family in there. And 100 years prior, a family had been murdered there. Sometimes the house had been converted into an attorney's office or a dental clinic. There was a 2-week period where we had a taillight out, and we kept forgetting to get it fixed. We got pulled over several times, and each time an officer would tell us about the taillight and ask what we were doing out so late. Jason would answer honestly, "We're out looking for haunted places." I kid you not, every time the officer would pause, then reply, "There's a fire hall down the road," or, "There's a place a couple streets over," and then give us a little bit about the folklore that goes along with that building. Then they would remind us to get the light fixed and wish us well. I kept track of the places we visited, and there are a few sites that stuck with me. One that comes to mind was in New Philadelphia, Ohio, where a teenage girl and a middle-aged man were found in a carriage, and the horse was walking in circles because the girl had fallen on the reins. That became the retro crime episode, Arlene the Teenage Dream. Another place that stuck with me was off of Hogs Hollow Road in the Appalachian farmlands outside of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and that's this episode. It involved two men, 51-year-old Ignatz Dombrowski and his 25-year-old nephew and godson, Edward, or Eddie Dombrowski. The uncle Ignatz was born in Poland and immigrated to Pennsylvania at 18 years old. He was among the first group drafted for World War I and was in 6 major engagements overseas. At the time of his death, he was renting a room in Newcastle and working on a WPA project at the courthouse. A little fun trivia here, and I used the word fun loosely. The WPA was called the Works Progress Administration until 1939, when it was the Works Projects Administration. For those who need to brush up on high school history class, it was part of President Roosevelt's New Deal to restore the country after the Great Depression. Men looking for work could get labor jobs for government projects. If you read To Kill a Mockingbird, my favorite book, Bob Ewell, the racist, daughter-raping, attempted murderer, got a job after the trial with the WPA and was soon fired. Scout called him the only man she ever knew who was fired from the WPA for laziness. The press referred to Ignatz as a bachelor. Back then, it didn't mean just a single and suave guy ready to meet some sexy local singles. It meant that he was a spinster of the male variety. Never married, no kids, but because he was a man, it lacked the fierce judgment it still holds for women. Kamala Harris is now referred to as the old cat lady because she is a stepmother and doesn't have biological children. I am also a stepmother, and I can assure you that it is still motherhood. With biological children, nature establishes a bond so that, mothers don't eat their young or whatever. With children acquired through marriage, the bond is different. It has to develop. Trust is not overnight. Trust gets developed too. And all the meanwhile, while that bond is developing, I still have to take care of them like they're my own. Now they're just my kids. I don't think about them as stepkids or anything. So I give women credit who are good stepmothers and defy the Disney stereotype. Eddie Dombrowski. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and moved to Newcastle as a child. When Eddie was 16 years old, his 14-year-old brother Henry died of tuberculosis at a sanitarium 2.5 hours away. Tuberculosis was rampant in the Polish community at the time. It was from trench warfare soldiers being in such close proximity, they got sick, and when they returned, they got their friends and family sick. Despite this tragedy, Eddie had been a locally famous athlete in high school. He was a sort of town pride, especially for his football skills. In fact, 7 years after graduating, when his death was all over the papers, the Newcastle headlines still referred to him as a gridiron star. After he graduated, he joined the military and became a sharpshooter in the cavalry regiment of the Pennsylvania National Guard. After the military, Eddie married a nice Catholic girl named Rose, and they lived with his parents in Newcastle. She lived with his parents, actually. He only was there on weekends. He rented a room during the week in Clairton, which is an hour and a half away from Newcastle. It's a suburb of Pittsburgh along the Monongahela River. And like my father-in-law and my grandfather-in-law, he got a job at the steel mill. If you ever watched the show What We Do in the Shadows, Clairton is where regular human bartender Jackie Daytona worked. On July 31st of 1939, Eddie told his wife that he had to see a guy about selling his car. He also told a work buddy that he would give him a ride as they were scheduled for the night shift. His wife found it odd when he told her not to make him sandwiches or set his clothes out until he returned from showing the guy his car. He dropped his sister-in-law off at a party, but Rose stayed home to wait for Eddie so that they could go to the party together. Then Eddie drove to where Ignatz was renting a room from an older married couple. Prior to moving in with them, Ignatz had been living with various relatives over the years. The owners of the house said that Ignatz was at work. Eddie seemed surprised and asked when he was due back, and they said about an hour. Eddie returned just after Ignatz got home and called for him. Ignatz went outside in his pants, undershirt, socks, and no shirt or shoes. He chatted with Eddie for a while, and the nosy, or as they say in Pittsburgh, nebby, the nebby owners of the house, saw them laughing and joking. Then, without even going inside to finish dressing, Ignatz got into the passenger seat and they drove off. A couple hours later, their bodies were found next to Eddie's car in an abandoned spot off of Hog Hollow Road in the farm country outside of Newcastle. A farmer visiting friends nearby heard the sound of a horn blasting nonstop and went to investigate. 25-year-old Eddie was at the right rear of the car, and 51-year-old Ignatz was at the front right. There was a gun near Eddie, and all 9 bullets in the chamber were gone. 1 bullet was found in a beer can nearby. 5 bullets were found in Ignatz, 4 on his right side and 1 on his left, and the one on the left blew his heart out. The remaining 3 were shot closely together within a 2-inch radius of Eddie's heart. The forensic evidence was clear. Eddie's fingerprints were on the gun, and powder burns were on his chest. Nothing of value was taken. The conclusion was Eddie had shot his uncle, then himself. At first, the police assumed it was a homicide because Eddie's family was shocked and could not offer a motive. Eddie's wife and his 20-year-old brother Frank insisted that it made no sense. Ignatz and Eddie were best friends and had been inseparable for many years. Rose said that Eddie raved about Ignatz and said that he was the luckiest guy in the world to have him because he was the best uncle and best friend a guy could have. Rose also insisted that Eddie didn't own a gun, and his family had no idea where the gun came from. However, the day prior, Eddie had been seen buying the bullets that were found at the crime scene. The police discovered something that was a possible motive, but the family still insisted that there wasn't one. The owners of where Ignatz lived told them that 3 months prior, Eddie had taken out a life insurance policy on his uncle and had only seen him twice since, both times not to hang out, but to talk about the life insurance policy. In a bizarre twist, Eddie didn't make his wife his beneficiary, even though he would be leaving her without an income and living with his unemployed parents. His brother Frank was named as the beneficiary. Eddie's family held their funeral together on a rainy day, and Ignatz and Eddie were buried next to each other. Murder-suicides are rare, and they generally involve a husband or boyfriend killing their partner first. The less rare murder-suicides involve a dad killing his whole family, or a mother dying with her children, or suicide after a mass killing, like school shooters have done, or murder being the result of a suicide, like driving into oncoming traffic. This one is different. That's why this stuck with me. I have looked at this from so many angles because I don't want to make any horrible false accusations. But I will say, as soon as Jason and I found the murder site in 2021, I told Jason just the details of what happened, not the why. We both got a sense of why and didn't even have to say it. We just looked at each other sadly and said, yeah, I know. But gut feelings aren't facts. They are incredibly valuable and probably save our lives more than we realize, but they're not an explanation. So I kept looking into different angles to see if any could hold water. I've been trying over and over again to put myself in their heads to see it from their perspectives. I have dug into every area I can think of, and the more I learned, the more I kept being led in this same point Jason and I first arrived at. Most things aren't convoluted. When broken down, they usually make sense. This wasn't about money or just a random act of violence. It was about the consequences of long-term sexual abuse within a close community. Edward was 16 when his 14-year-old brother Henry died from tuberculosis in a sanatorium he couldn't visit regularly. Since they were close in age and a large family, they were probably close friends in general. With his parents grieving, Eddie couldn't get the comfort he needed. There are signs of something in the home causing dysfunction. I'm guessing alcoholism, but it could also be mental illness, or in many cases both. His father was chronically unemployed, and that was understandable during the Great Depression, but by 1939, jobs were available. Even his deadbeat brother had one, yet Eddie's father was still having difficulty maintaining one. Also, dysfunctional families create specific roles for their children according to their birth order. The oldest kid is considered the hero. He or she excels in a variety of things, especially athletics and academics. Their job is to make the family appear normal, and in the process, convince all of them that they are. They get their parents' praise and favoritism. The second is the scapegoat, and that was Henry. He didn't even need to be alive to be the scapegoat. His death would have been blamed for everything negative. I drink because my son died. I can't get out of bed because my son died. It would have been the ultimate excuse. To a degree, I understand. I might have sunk into an even worse despair if I were them. Our next episode is going to be in Pikeville, Kentucky, which is the McCoy area of the Hatfield-McCoy feuds. And Sally McCoy, the matriarch of the McCoy clan, she lost so many children that she ended up in an insane asylum, and her husband, Old Randall, he drank. The Dombrowski kids had it especially rough after that. Henry's young death devastated a family that already had enough imperfections, so Eddie tried harder to fix things the only way he knew how. He went from being a great athlete to a local superstar. But back at home, his parents' eyes were on their own pain, not Eddie's achievements. But someone else noticed him. Suddenly, Uncle Ignatz appeared and stepped in as Eddie's godfather to be the dad he needed. Eddie felt special to him. His uncle adored him and wanted to spend all of his ample unemployed time with his adolescent nephew. By this point, the grooming had long since started. Predators have sharp eyes for vulnerabilities. He saw Eddie's unmet need for love, probably going back to early childhood, and he was willing to fill that need at a price. No one thought much of it for many reasons. There was a cultural aspect. Polish immigrant families were very close to their extended families. They needed each other for survival. It wasn't abnormal for kids to be like siblings with their cousins. As far as Ignatz being single, that also wouldn't be unusual in his case. He emigrated at 18 and was young enough not to have brought a wife with him. There was a language barrier, and with his dependency on his family and no income, he didn't have anything to offer a spouse. So the old busybodies at church wouldn't have been recommending him to their friends' daughters. So the stuff that sounds like red flags can be reasonably explained. Except reasonable explanations don't end in murder-suicide that took months of planning. Eddie was growing up and needed to get away from his family, but they were still in his head. He enlisted to serve his country, and not only is becoming a sharpshooter highly impressive, he joined the cavalry, which was especially honorable to his community because the U.S. cavalry was started by General Pulaski, a nobleman and fellow Polish immigrant. Trauma leaves people just wanting to be normal, especially when the suppressed emotional pain turns into depression. Normal people don't fight against high winds just to get out of bed. Normal people don't feel dirty and ashamed with secrets destroying them. Eddie tried being normal. He married a nice girl even though he wasn't too attached, and like a typical Pittsburgh man, he got a job in a steel mill. I've wondered if Eddie or Ignatz or both were possibly gay, especially after seeing their pictures, but we have done an episode before about a Polish immigrant who almost got away with murder because he was so handsome and well-dressed. I thought maybe that could be a secret they shared that bonded them and would lead to suicidal ideas in an all-American boy in 1939. But I put that aside because sexual abuse by men is most commonly by heterosexual men on heterosexual men. It has been a problem in militaries for a long time. My source on this is the United States Department of Defense. With 6 engagements and Ignatz being a pretty boy back then who barely spoke English, it would explain his inability to get his life together after the war. Since he lived off of family and was almost always unemployed, and after 6 engagements was surely shell-shocked, which is an old-fashioned word for PTSD, I'm sure he was an alcoholic. I spoke in the last episode about my father being a forensic psychologist. He hated alcohol. I thought it was because he grew up Southern Baptist, and when I was a teenager, I asked him about his aversion. I didn't expect his response. He said that when he has to go to court as an expert witness for cases involving incest, 100% of the time, alcohol has been involved. So here's a guy, Ignatz. He feels horrible about himself. He's a loser, and he's lonely. Instead of becoming a better person, it's easier to make oneself feel taller by pushing others down. He got this kid to idolize him, and he could control him and feel like he got the power back that was stolen from him when he was Eddie's age. I've been putting myself in Eddie's shoes. It's very sad shoes, and I'm in Eddie's head. What goes on in there is, my Uncle Ignatz loves me so much, I'm special to him. I wish my dad saw me the way he does and cared about how hard I try. But I have Uncle Ignatz. He's my uncle, godfather, and my best friend. We have so many private jokes, and we're always laughing. Sometimes he touches me, but he says he needs to because all guys need to, and he doesn't have a woman. No one has to know, it's just between us. Sometimes the stuff he does feels good, so I'm just as guilty if I like it too. This confusion goes on in Eddie's head for years. But Eddie grows up. He has a wife he can't touch. He's safe from disappointing her most of the week, so long as he works nights and gets a job an hour and a half away, so that he has to get a room in town during the week. In his room, he can keep his guns and his porno magazines. Male victims of sexual abuse have a high rate of porn addiction and seeking prostitutes because they're unable to be close in a vulnerable way. Also, of course he has guns. I don't know why the family was so surprised. He was a sharpshooter. He mastered a skill. His gun probably had a name. This built up to a triggering event, and I think it was related to having to sell the car that day. He had been married for nearly 3 years, and they were overdue for trying for their big Catholic family. His wife was a housewife, and the next step in her life's purpose would be motherhood. There was pressure from her and their mothers. Eddie's mother didn't have much going for her, so she wanted grandchildren, considering that her youngest was now 20. And also there's, of course, pressure from their church. What made this different is that now there was a concrete plan to sell his car. If the car was in good enough condition to sell and they're a working class family, they're probably selling it to get a bigger car more appropriate for a family with children. Concrete plan to make things real. And he couldn't go on anymore being a disappointment to his wife and mother for something that distance was helping him see might not have been his fault. Ignatz might have been showing more attention to Frank recently, as Eddie was out of town and Frank was closer, Frank was younger, more his type, Frank was vulnerable. Eddie would have been hurt because that meant he's not that special after all. Wanting to protect his sibling helped us sink in that it had been abuse. But he could never talk about it because everyone in his Catholic community would reject him, calling him a homosexual, and say, why didn't you just overpower him? Why was he friends with him? They would tell him it was his fault. So Ignatz had to go with him. It wasn't about the life insurance, which would have been worth about $20,000 in today's money. He didn't give it to his unemployed dad or his wife, who needed the money because she didn't have the means to support herself. He left it to his younger brother with no mortgage, no wife, no dependents. It was a way to protect him and give him a chance in life, a chance that Eddie was sacrificing. Frank did go on to have a decent life. He enlisted and fought in World War II. And Rose, soon after Eddie died, she remarried and she had children. According to her obituary, she died old and very loved. On the day the event happened, I've been putting myself in Eddie's shoes, and what happened is really sad. So I'm Eddie. Today's the day. It's my last day with the car. The car is where these things happened. I'm supposed to meet someone to sell the car, and there's a party Rose wants me to go to. Well, I can drop her sister off on the way, and she's only 5 minutes from Ignatz anyway. And I'll tell Rose that I will just come back for her after I show the guy the car, and we'll go to the party together. She'll like that. I never do anything with her. Now Rose says the guy's asking me to take him to work with me tonight. All right, time to go. Bye, Minnie. Have fun at the party. See you later. Not really. Off to Ignatz. It's 5:05 p.m. and he's working? Well, that's new. I'll be back in an hour then. In the meantime, I'm looking for a spot. I'm going to put a beer can there to shoot, and that way I can take out the gun and Ignatz won't be any the wiser. Time to go back and get him. Then car horn, honk honk. There he is. Hey, Ignatz. Haha, it's good to see you too. Hey, I've got some time. Why don't we hang out and catch up? Oh, just get in the car. We'll go for a drive and you won't need shoes. We're not even going to get out of the car. Then I'm driving. Oh, here's a good spot. I know what Ignatz is thinking, but that's not going to happen this time. He's in for a surprise. Hey, do you want to see me hit that can over there? Boom. Okay, now I've got the gun out. Before Ignatz dies, he needs to know what he did and how he's going to pay. I want to see the fear on his face before I destroy him. May God understand why I have to do this. All right, he figured it out and he looks terrified. I bet more terrified than he ever felt in the trenches. I'm not done with my speech, but oh damn, he's getting out of the car. I can't let him get away with it. Boom, boom, boom. Damn it, if he hadn't suddenly turned to get out of the car, I could have gotten a kill shot. Boom, got him. Man alive, I'm free, finally. Now it's my turn. I bet I'm so quick that I can use all 3 bullets before bleeding out. I'm not going to prison, and I'm not going to stay in this internal one. I better put a pin in the horn so that they find us quickly so that Frank gets the life insurance money. He'll share with Rose, but I don't think she would share with him. May God forgive me. Boom, boom, boom. Sorry that was so flippant. I find his response very understandable compared to what he went through. Crimes up close like this, where the victim knows what's going to happen, are extremely personal. If Eddie just wanted his uncle dead for the money, he wouldn't have wanted Ignatz to see it coming. He would have shot him from a distance, and he certainly could have. If he was just insane and paranoid, he wouldn't have been able to hold a steady full-time job and be known as a reliable worker. If it was a crime of passion, he wouldn't have planned it. Ignatz, on his end, he didn't see it coming because he was too selfish to think he would have consequences. He ignored the red flag of the life insurance policy because he was desperate to see Eddie. There's more awareness now, but it will remain underreported. Eddie's fate will continue in others, and there will be more suicides. And there's a reason for this. People have proven on a massive scale that they will discredit all survivors in favor of someone they like. Right now, a self-confessed, unrepentant sexual predator is running for the presidency of the United States of America. I understand the phrase, vote for the policy, not the person. But there were people with the same policies, and his party still chose him. They didn't choose someone who was decent, who has a clean record. And this is a role model for our sons and daughters, that this is a person who is successful. This is the person to emulate. There will be more suicides because millions of people are telling us every single day, it's okay if I like you. And who do people like? We like our teachers. We like our pastors. We like our family. People will keep hearing, I've known him for so long and he's never been inappropriate with me. Or he would never do something like that. So, of course, people aren't reporting. What they can do, what anyone can do, regardless of age or gender or amount of self-blame, they can call 1-800-656-HOPE, which is the National Sexual Assault Hotline. It's confidential and they can help. I'll give you the number again, 1-800-656-HOPE. Maybe Eddie's family couldn't understand and they went to their graves mystified. We can understand and we can keep trying to prevent anyone from being in Eddie's shoes or Ignatz. We can prevent monsters from being created. With Eddie's family, I'm certain that at least one person in that big Polish Catholic working class community knew for years that something wasn't right. They knew in their gut something bad was happening to Eddie, but they looked for other explanations.